Hi everyone, my name is Nandi Kaul and welcome to the Faculty of Management Speaker Series online. It is my absolute pleasure to introduce our guest speaker for today, Habib Dable, who will be joining us from Massachusetts, USA. Habib Dable joined Acceleron Pharma in December 2016 as the company's president and chief executive officer and member of its board of directors. Mr. Dable is also currently a member of the board of directors of Millendo Therapeutics, also listed on the Nasdaq Stock Exchange, and recently served on the board of directors of the Biotechnology Innovation Organization. For over 25 years, Habib Dable has increased profits and expanded market share for organizations in the pharmaceutical industry, from big pharma corporations to smaller biotech firms. Prior to joining Acceleron Pharma, Mr. Dable served as President of U.S. Pharmaceuticals at Bayer. During his 22-year tenure there, Mr. Dable held positions of increasing responsibility. Mr. Dable has negotiated deals, managed partnerships, and launched billion-dollar products, including Eylea, Stivarga, and Xofigo, and positioned mature brands for heightened success. His work as an operations and commercial executive spans geographic regions, drug classes, and therapeutic areas, including cardiovascular disease, hematology, neurology, neuromuscular, oncology, ophthalmology, pulmonary, and women's health. Habib Dable received his BBA and MBA from the University of New Brunswick. Hi Habib, welcome to the speaker series online and thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, good morning, Andy. Thanks for having me.
How's everything in Wellesley? Are you working remotely?
I am like the majority of the entire United States at this time. Unfortunately, due to the pandemic, we have found that the majority of our workforce, including myself, have been working remotely. But fortunately, it's working. Our team is healthy, and we continue to operate.
That's good to hear. So, Habib, what have been the formative influences in your life?
Yeah, it's a great question, Andy. I've been pretty fortunate, both throughout my academic career and professional career, to have benefited from a number of influencers and very thoughtful people who have provided me with certain gems or nuggets along the way to help make me a better person. But ultimately, I'd have to say it's really it goes down to the lessons and the values that I've learned from my father growing up that I think have allowed me to be the leader that I am. And the reason I say that is when I think of his success, I attribute that to an exceptional skill set around emotional intelligence and his ability to build strong, trusting relationships with people. And I'm convinced that's a result of his transparency, his empathy, but most importantly, his integrity. And in this business, integrity is really our license to operate. And it takes years and years to establish and earn that integrity, and you can lose it in an instant. And so I'm very, very fortunate to have benefited and been influenced by very, very many people in my life, but most importantly, I'd say my father.
Thank you for sharing that. So, you completed both your BBA and your MBA at UNB. Can you tell us a bit about your journey since then?
Yeah, soon after graduating from my MBA, I started in the pharmaceutical industry as a sales rep in Fredericton. It's funny, you go through the MBA program and you're taught how to run a company and be a CEO, but there's not a lot of companies that are out there giving CEO positions for fresh grads. So I started carrying the bag as a sales representative in Fredericton. Actually, my territory was actually all of New Brunswick and half of Atlantic Canada. But I did that for a few years, and then I moved on to Toronto. I then came back to Atlantic Canada, was a district sales manager for all of Atlantic Canada. And then after moving from that, I moved to Japan. And in Japan, I was running the portfolio strategy as well as strategic planning department for Bayer. And it was at that time where Bayer was integrating with the blood plasma business with another company. Had asked me to come to North Carolina to work in the biologics business. Unfortunately, that deal never transpired and ended up selling the biologics business. And once we successfully did that, I ended up moving to California, working in the hemophilia space, launching a drug called Cogenate around the world, and then came to New Jersey in 2008, where I was running the global specialty medicines business, and then ultimately became the president of the U.S. Pharmaceuticals business for Bayer before late 2016, moving on for the first time from Bayer to taking on the position that I hold today at Acceleron.
Wow, that's quite a journey. How was your experience in Japan?
Oh, the experience in Japan was exceptional in many ways for me. And it wasn't always the case. I think it stretched my limits, especially during the first few months where everything was just new to me. And at many times I found myself lost and lonely. But I have to tell you, over time, I really learned a lot about myself. I learned a lot about pause and reflection and patience. And I got to appreciate the culture a lot more. And ultimately, I met my wife there. So it was an awesome experience. And if she's listening right now, she'd expect me to say that.
Happy wife, happy life.
Exactly. Exactly.
As the Chief Executive Officer, President, and Director of Acceleron Pharma, which is a publicly traded company, what is a typical day at work like for you?
Well, I'm not sure there really is a typical day, and obviously now in the midst of this pandemic, those norms are being challenged wildly. But ultimately, Nandi, there are multiple stakeholders that I'm catering to on a regular basis, whether it's my executive team, the entire employee base, my board of directors, you know, clinical investigators, key opinion leaders, and then ultimately, the shareholders of our company. And so many parts of my day are around, just speaking with my team, allowing them to, share with me what their needs are and how I can potentially, help them do their job better. I'm also spending a lot of time, with external, communications, whether it's the media, whether it's the investor relations community. And quite frankly, I'd have to say the best part of my day, though, and my favorite part, is that I chair a number of committees. One of the committees I sit on is the product development committee, and that's where we innovate. That's where we sit down, collectively as a group, and we're talking about finding opportunities where our sources of innovation can transform patients' lives. And I have to say that's probably the favorite part of any of my schedule, is when we're sitting down, listening to my team share with me, the progress that they're making in finding therapies that could ultimately improve, the lives of the patients we're trying to serve.
So, you joined Acceleron Pharma in December 2016, and since then, the company's stock price has jumped nearly 400%. How did you achieve that?
Well, I mean, first of all, there's a lot of people associated with that success. I think we've been lucky. I think in this business, you do what you can to make the significant investments in developing drugs and assets and trying to bring them forward. But it takes an awful lot of time and investment. And many of my peers aren't fortunate enough to even bring a drug to market. And most recently, our lead asset, luspatercept, now approved in the United States under the trade name of Reblozyl, got approval for its first two indications. And so that was a huge catalyst for us as a company. It was very validating for our platform and obviously very rewarding for our shareholders. That said, we have had some failures along the way. And it's the learnings associated with those failures that I think only make us stronger. And the way we have handled those failures, again, with tremendous integrity, I think has allowed us to continue to be a valued partner and stakeholder for many people. And most recently, this year, we had a second asset established proof of concept, a drug called sotatercept, in the pulmonary arterial hypertension space. And so that gave us some increased confidence in our ability to move that drug forward into phase 3 trials. And so we've been very lucky, but I also attribute it to a very, very strong team, very committed to driving excellence through and execution through excellence. And I'm very, very proud of them, and very much look forward to continuing to innovate and doing what we do best.
Okay. And how important is a company's stock value? What does it reflect?
Well, when you say stock value, I'm assuming you're referring to share price, and the share price is obviously an indicator of performance. I mean, ultimately, it's the number of shares that are issued and outstanding multiplied, by your share price on at least on a non-diluted basis that represent your market capitalization. And in many cases, that's how people are measuring you as a CEO and as a company in terms of its track record of success. And ultimately, as an investor, it's the share price itself that you're most interested in as at least an investor. That said, sometimes it can be a little bit misleading because, as I said, when you multiply the share price times the market capitalization times the number of shares outstanding, you get your market cap. And in this particular case, as you noted, we were pretty fortunate that during my tenure that the stock has tripled around that during that time. Yet our market capitalization has gone up 5 or 6 times. And the way that happens is really as a result of the number of shares. And we've diluted our shareholder base probably 3 times since I've been here now through various public offerings where we're using sources of funds by issuing new shares to garner financial capital to allow us to make the investments in drug development. And so as a result of those shares that have been issued, combined with the share price increase, the market capitalization of the company has gone from around $1 billion to today where it's around $6 billion.
Wow, that's incredible. How important is the perception of a company's stock versus the actual achievements of a company? And is it always the same?
Many times there are outside variables that affect a share price that have nothing to do with your company's success or failures. Case in point is this pandemic. You could be going through a string of successes within a company, which you would think intrinsically should be driving your stock price up, but yet in the middle of a pandemic, shareholders are running to safety and are changing their portfolios based on the risk profile of the moment. And that could actually drive your share price down.
Yeah.
And I'd say another thing that also is really important is the communication strategy. I'm very, very fortunate to have a very strong investor relations department where we're able to get access to many of our shareholders through various events, et cetera, and communicate our storyline. And that communication and that frequent communication is very, very important to ensure that your activities are being delivered in a way with transparency where shareholders can fully appreciate and understand those successes.
You transformed Acceleron Pharma from a traditionally research-based company into a forward-moving drug development and commercial organization. Why was that the trajectory that you chose?
Well, I'm not sure that was actually my decision. I would argue that the board of directors in recruiting me to the company 4 years ago had a vision. And in many cases, small biotech companies where they're heavily influenced through their research departments sometimes get into clinical development and oftentimes never end up going to commercialization, either through acquisitions, partnering, et cetera. I believe our board of directors had a vision of building a fully integrated biopharmaceutical company. I mean, quite frankly, when they hired somebody with my phenotype, it wasn't because of my scientific successes and experiences. My history has been around, leveraging clinical successes and turning them into commercial successes. And coming into the company in mid late stage development with that vision has been a really important part of my daily execution in terms of building the teams, putting into get together the various processes that will allow us to continue to thrive and to grow as a fully integrated biopharmaceutical company. And so that's a vision that I think has been held by the board for many years, and I'm really proud that we've been able to execute accordingly.
That's interesting. You are also a member on the board of another company, which is also
Yes,
listed on the Nasdaq stock
correct.
exchange, Millendo Therapeutics. So why is it important to be on another company's board?
Well, I think there's a number of advantages, Nandi, by sitting on a number of boards, and even on my executive committee. At a certain point through their development and their career progression, we also encourage them to start considering sitting on at least one outside board as part of their development at a certain time in their career. And I think by doing so, it provides you with a number of advantages. And one, you're able to witness how another company works, whether it's in a new therapeutic area, different life cycle trajectory, or perhaps even in a completely different industry. The second thing I think it does is it gives you a strategic viewpoint from a different seat that nobody else other than the board has. And I think those learnings not only are good for the individuals in terms of their personal development, I also think it helps us as a company in being able to benefit from those viewpoints and from leaders developing strategically from many different angles.
And what happens if there is a potential conflict of interest?
That's a really good question. And as you can imagine, specifically with board members who actually do not hold operating positions, many of them sit on 4, 5, 6 different boards. And if it's almost inevitable that conflicts will arise. And quite frankly, if the conflict becomes and the overlap is so huge, sometimes members are asked to step off a board because they just simply can't contribute if it's the majority of the conversation. But in most cases, I'd say conflicts do arise. And in those cases where it's not so profound that a board member needs to step down, they're asked to recuse themselves from that discussion. And that happens, and I've seen that happen many times. And in most cases, everyone's a professional; they understand that, and nobody takes any personal offense to having to recuse themselves from various discussions due to those potential conflicts. At least that's been my experience.
Okay. And in your experience working for and running publicly traded companies, is delivering value to shareholders and customers ever different?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So as I mentioned before, the one thing that excites me about this job is being able to, invest resources in specific areas of innovation, where in many cases, there are no therapeutic options for the patients that we're serving, and so the patients are oftentimes rooting for our success, and that's front and foremost in my mind all the time is, what can we do as a company to help patients live better lives?
So, what motivated you to work in the healthcare industry in the first place?
Yeah, so that's interesting. So it's funny, you obviously don't know this, but my first semester in university was actually in the science program. And I always had a curiosity for science. I had an aptitude for science. But my passion was really business and being a leader. And so what I did is, it's funny because it was actually in that first semester doing what every, I think first year science student did was, making ASA in the chemistry lab. And so the irony of that is I ended up transferring to business, and then years later, as opposed to being in a lab and making ASA, I'm working for the company who manufactured and sold ASA, Bayer Aspirin.
Okay.
So this was a great opportunity for me to combine my aptitudes for science, my curiosity for science, but also my love for business and building organizations.
What areas of healthcare is Acceleron Pharma currently involved in?
The one common thread across everything that we do at Acceleron in terms of our own organic innovation is in this family of biology called the TGF beta superfamily of proteins and ligands. So that stands for transforming growth factor. And so that's what we've been doing here since our founding in 2003. And it's our focus on building fusion proteins that are able to trap these ligands in this particular family of biology and trying to find therapeutic solutions for patients where this particular area of biology has an influence on patient health.
Okay.
And so in doing so, our focus has been today it is in hematology as well as in pulmonary. And over time, that has changed. I mean, historically, we had a very significant investment in neuromuscular. But as I mentioned to you before, we had a number of failures, which has forced us to focus our attention now on these two very specific therapeutic areas of hematology and pulmonary. But again, based on this family of biology known as the TGF beta superfamily.
You mentioned pulmonary. Has the COVID-19 influenced pulmonary research at Acceleron Pharma?
Yeah, that's a really good and thoughtful question, Nandi. So we do have a number of trials that are ongoing in the pulmonary space, specifically in the field of pulmonary arterial hypertension. And in some cases, we have had some slowdown in recruitment in one of our particular studies. Because you have to remember, these are critical care specialists in many cases, and as a result, they're being taxed during these very difficult times. And so we have had some cases in some of the hotspots where there's been some delays, but overall, we've been, very, very pleased in our ability to continue to execute during this time.
Before Acceleron, you were with Bayer for 22 years, where you started as a medical sales rep and eventually became the president of their largest division, U.S. Pharmaceuticals. As your responsibilities grew, how did your management skills evolve?
Yeah, so I mean, I think as your career grows and as your responsibilities broaden, you become less of a specialist, and you really focus a lot more on people development, communication. You become a lot less operational and a lot more strategic. And I'd say I've really been focusing on honing in on those skills of really trying to be a better leader, and really spending a lot of my time in upfront, at least, in building the right team. And then once that's been achieved, to disproportionately spend my time in helping that team try to achieve their very, very best and motivating them to do so. And that's something I continue to work on.
Okay, thank you for sharing that. And as you know, the pharma industry has seen a rapid consolidation through mergers and acquisitions. What are your views on that? And has it influenced the biopharmaceutical space?
Well, it's obviously influenced it tremendously. I think what we've seen recently is a tremendous amount of M&A, but also partnerships. And I think what big pharma companies have found is that by leveraging, external innovation, they're able to, fund their research in unique ways that's not necessarily in-house. But I also think they're able to benefit from diversity of thinking, and by partnering appropriately or acquiring companies, they're able to benefit from a completely different school of thought in many cases, if those partnerships or acquisitions are done right, because in many times they're not, and the bigger company, their culture swallows the smaller company's culture, and a lot of those benefits are lost. But I've seen it in many cases done right, and I have to tell you, in this particular case with Acceleron, I'm very pleased that we are able to collaborate with a big pharmaceutical company, yet at the same time still have tremendous influence because of the significant voice at the table that they've allowed us to continue to have. And I think that creates a win-win situation for both sides.
Would that be Celgene Corp?
So it used to be Celgene Corp. Celgene was recently acquired in the spirit of M&A by Bristol Myers late last year.
Is there any message that you would like to share with UNB students who are looking to grow like you?
Well, I mean, I think the one thing I'd say is be very, very proud. UNB is a wonderful institution that's allowed me to benefit, in many ways. And at the end of the day, I would, encourage the students to take advantage of every opportunity they have outside of their daily routine, find opportunities to network, but to be very, very motivated, and that there's exceptional opportunities for awaiting them after they graduate.
Thank you. Do you plan to visit New Brunswick anytime after the pandemic?
Yeah, and well, I mean, traditionally, Nandi, I visit my parents still live in Fredericton. I still have an extended family in Fredericton and a lot of friends in Fredericton. So we traditionally go to Fredericton 2 or 3 times a year. This summer, unfortunately, as you know, it was not possible due to the pandemic. We're hopeful that we'll be able to celebrate Christmas with my family this year, but again, we'll have to see. And God willing, this pandemic will have subsided, and we'll have the opportunity to come home.
Well, if you do, we should meet in person, and definitely we should have a session in person with Speaker Series.
I'd very much enjoy that. Thank you, Nandi.
And on that note, Habib, on behalf of the UNB community, the Faculty of Management, and all our viewers today, we'd like to thank you so much for taking the time to do this interview and sharing your experiences and journey with us today.
Thanks for having me, Nandi. It was my pleasure.
Thank you.